Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're exploring what feels like a real paradigm shift in multimodal AI. We're moving past simple image description and into something researchers are calling a think and sketch process.
hmm
And for the longest time, we've watched even the most advanced models just, completely struggle with tasks that require manipulating visual elements.
Right. Things like spatial reasoning.
Exactly. Spatial reasoning, complex chart analysis. They can tell you what's in a picture, but they can't actively say, move the pieces around in their head to test a hypothesis.
And that is the core challenge. The traditional way of thinking, the chain of thought method, it just hits a wall when a task is really grounded in visual dynamics.
It's like trying to solve a maze just by reading directions out loud.
Yes, without ever drawing on the map or, highlighting a dead end. So the central hypothesis with this new research is that for true multimodal reasoning, the text thoughts and the image thoughts have to be complementary.
Complementary. Okay, that's a really powerful distinction. So you're saying they have to mutually advance the reasoning process.
It's just like,
They can't just be, what's the word? Isomorphic,
Mm.
where the model just wastes its effort drawing a picture of something the text just finished describing.
exactly right. Think of it more like a partnership. You have one partner, the text, that handles the logic, the strategy, and then the other partner, the image generator, performs the concrete action.
Just sketching.
The sketching, the rearranging, the focusing, it provides the visual evidence for the strategy. And when that visual evidence changes things, the text has to update its logic. It's an internal adaptive dialogue.
I love that framing. A collaborative dialogue inside the machine. And the model at the center of all this is ThinkMorph. It's a unified model fine-tuned on, around 24,000 of these interleaved reasoning traces?
That's the one.
So our mission for this deep dive is to explore how this approach doesn't just deliver huge performance gains, but, and this is the really exciting part, it unlocks these entirely new, surprising forms of intelligent behavior that, nobody explicitly trained it for.
Okay, let's unpack that mechanism a bit. Interleaved chain of thought. If you're listening, you probably know chain of thought, where the model explains its reasoning in text. How does adding the visual part change the game?
Well, the thought process inside ThinkMorph, it alternates dynamically. You get the textual tokens, the planning step, let's call it, followed immediately by the visual tokens.
The sketching step.
The active sketching step, yes. And that alternating sequence is the thought process. The key here is that the visual token isn't just some label. It's a concrete, generative manipulation of the original image.
And that's what separates this from the older methods we've seen, right? This isn't just a tool-augmented model calling some external function. Not at all.
Yeah.
And it's not confined to simple text action labels. With ThinkMorph, the visual part can actively draw something new, it can rearrange elements, highlight an area, all while the textual logic is maintaining the overall context.
It creates this kind of closed-loop system for quality control inside the model itself.
It does. The text might say, okay, I hypothesize this is the answer. Then the visual step generates the evidence to check that. If the check fails, the text has to adjust its strategy. It's a form of mutual reinforcement.
Which prevents it from just spiraling into those purely textual hallucinations that are, visually nonsense.
Completely implausible, yeah.
And the tasks they chose for training really seem to nail this idea of needing that concrete manipulation. Let's dig into why those 4 specific tasks were so effective.
Absolutely. Let's start with jigsaw assembly. I mean, the text can describe the pieces all day long, but if they're scattered, how does it confirm continuity?
It can't.
Right. So the crucial step is the visual token, which takes those scattered pieces and actually visualizes them rearranged into a hypothesized final image.
So then the text can look at that new arrangement and say,
Yes, that corner aligns perfectly with that edge.
yeah.
It's checking for spatial continuity in a way text alone never could.
Okay, and what about spatial navigation? The grid maps with all the obstacles?
Well, there, the text might set a high-level plan, something like go generally southwest, but that's way too coarse.
You'd hit a wall.
You'd hit a wall. So the image tokens then come in and overlay red lines and arrows right onto the map, rendering the exact path. This lets the planning text confirm that the path avoids every single obstacle.
So the same logic applies to observational tasks, like visual search.
Same principle. The text might guess the object is probably near the basket of fruit, but that's vague. The visual token immediately draws a precise bounding box right around that spot.
And that box becomes a visual anchor.
A concrete visual anchor, yes. It allows the text to then perform a much more fine-grained analysis of just that area.
And finally, chart refocus. Extracting a value from a bar chart.
A classic problem. The text identifies the key elements, say, the bar for 2022 and the y-axis value of a 150. Then the image tokens highlight or draw boxes around those specific regions.
So the text has this magnified, undeniable value to work with.
Exactly. The act of sketching becomes a necessary step in the intellectual argument the model is building for itself. And when you look at the raw numbers, I mean, the benefit of moving from this passive description to active manipulation it's just staggering.
Okay, let's hear it.
Across all the vision-centric benchmarks, ThinkMorph delivered an average improvement of 34.7% over the base model.
35% on average. That's huge. But I imagine the spikes on specific tasks that really demand that visual element were even more dramatic.
Oh, absolutely. Let's talk about spatial navigation.
The grid world tasks.
Right. That task is the perfect illustration of how critical this is. The base model, with only textual reasoning, had an accuracy of 0.83%.
Wait, less than 1%?
Less than 1%. It was essentially failing, just completely failing the task, because it couldn't internally visualize the path it was planning.
Okay, so from less than 1% to what?
ThinkMorph boosted that performance to 86.67%.
No, that's an 85% improvement.
Nice.
That's not an optimization. That's the model suddenly gaining a new sense, the ability to actually interact with its world.
It's the difference between blindly reciting directions and, actually tracing the route with your finger on a map. When the problem inherently requires that visual manipulation, this interleaved reasoning is really the only way forward.
But this is where that idea of complementarity really gets proven, right? To distinguish it from just being redundant. The researchers used the chart refocus task for this.
They did, to figure out when that visual step is absolutely necessary versus when the text could maybe handle it alone.
So what happened on the in-domain chart QA benchmark?
This is fascinating. On chart QA, which is very structured, the text-only reasoning actually outperformed the interleaved method, just slightly, by about 1.88%, which suggests that if the text can fully express all the elements it needs, like if reading a bar value is simple enough, then that extra visual highlighting step is actually a bit redundant.
So the model is acting like a skeptical engineer. It sees the blueprint is detailed enough and decides not to run the expensive visual simulation.
Precisely. The visual step doesn't add value if the answer is already clear from the initial visual encoding. But, and this is a big but, that only holds for in-domain structured tasks. The picture changes completely on the out-of-domain MMVP benchmark.
Which covers more general perception.
Exactly. And on those generalized tasks.
Let me guess, interleaved was better.
Far better. It surpassed the text-only approach by 6.33%. And this is the key takeaway. Interleaved reasoning is crucial for generalization, especially when you need that fine-grained visual grounding. When the text can't rely on familiar patterns, sketching out the proof becomes essential.
The performance gains are one thing, but what really elevates this for me are the emergent properties, these abilities that just arose not from explicit instruction, but spontaneously. They feel like true hallmarks of a more adaptive intelligence.
The first one is unseen visual manipulations. ThinkMorph basically developed the ability to generate entirely new visual edits it was never ever trained on.
That's incredible. So it was trained on basic path drawing, bounding boxes, and then it just started producing things like, in-painting or perspective shifts on its own.
Yes. The most common one, and maybe the most useful, was this autonomous zoom-in operation.
So if it's looking at a tricky image.
Right. Imagine a question like, is the bell pepper red or yellow? Where the color might be kind of subtle. Mid-reasoning, the model just decided on its own to generate a zoomed-in view to get a better look at the hue.
It's like a person leaning in closer or grabbing a magnifying glass. It realized its current evidence wasn't good enough. How did it even learn to do that?
Well, the raw ability, the fundamental skill to zoom or shift perspective, that was already there from its massive pre-training. But the interleaved fine-tuning acted as a kind of contextual director. It taught the model that these latent skills should be deployed strategically as a reasoning tool whenever it faces uncertainty.
Okay, that explains the how. Now, what about the second property, which feels even more human-like, autonomous mode switching?
This was completely unexpected. Remember, it was trained exclusively on interleaved traces. Every single training sample involved both text and image steps.
Okay.
But during inference, on the general perception benchmark, it autonomously switched to purely text-only reasoning in over 5% of the cases.
And were these switches good? Were they a sign of efficiency?
Absolutely. The samples where it decided to skip the sketch achieved an 81% accuracy. That was a 7.3% improvement over those same samples when they were forced to use the interleaved process.
So it recognized when the extra visual work was just redundant and, saved itself the trouble. It's showing a kind of metacognition.
That's a great way to put it. We saw clear adaptive behavior. For a simple question like, we cannot see the window on the school bus, where the visual cues are obvious, it just switched to pure text. It didn't need to draw a box around a window that wasn't there.
But for something more fine-grained.
For a fine-grained question like, can you see stems of bananas in the image? Right, so it stuck with the interleaved approach. It actually executed a zoom in on the bananas to verify the presence of the stems. It's making a real-time judgment call. Be efficient when the answer is obvious. Be deliberate when the detail is critical.
And the third property, better test time scaling via diversified thoughts. This is about finding the best solution when you sample multiple paths.
Exactly. If you think about unimodal reasoning, text only, for example, you're stuck in one representational space. If you're just trying to solve a problem with language.
Okay.
Interleaved reasoning explores a much broader, richer, multimodal solution space. Every time the model sketches, it changes its own input, which forces the next text step down a new thought trajectory.
And that diversity of trajectories is what helps it find better answers.
Yes. Under best-of-n sampling, the benefit was crystal clear. On the really tough blink jigsaw benchmark, where visual-only reasoning actually got worse with more samples, interleaved reasoning delivered a stable and substantial 8% improvement. That ability to switch modalities when one gets stuck is crucial.
So the collective message here seems to be that this lately fine-tuned 7 billion parameter model is really punching above its weight. It's rivaling or even exceeding much larger proprietary models.
That's probably the most exciting outcome for researchers who care about efficiency. I mean, the training set was relatively modest, only 24,000 samples, but ThinkMorph showed incredible competitiveness. It surpassed the much larger 38 billion parameter intern VL 3.5 on the SAT spatial reasoning test.
And how did it stack up against the big names, the proprietary models we all hear about?
It actually matched Gemini 2.5 Flash on the MMVP general perception benchmark. They both hit just over 80% accuracy. But, and this is critical, on the really intensive reasoning tests like that SAT benchmark, it significantly outperformed GPT-4o.
By how much?
ThinkMorph hit 52.67% accuracy. GPT-4o was at 28%.
That is a staggering gap, nearly 25 percentage points. It really suggests that just scaling up the size of a model without fundamentally changing the reasoning process isn't going to get you there.
That's the takeaway. It reinforces the whole message here. Light, high-quality, interleaved fine-tuning is an incredibly potent catalyst. It enabled this unified model to leverage its visual generation ability not just as an output, but as an active internal tool.
Which reinforces its textual understanding.
And makes the whole system more capable and far more generalizable. At the end of the day, the quality of the intellectual process seems to matter more than just the raw size of the model.
Yeah.
#tag outro. So fundamentally, interleaved reasoning is changing how these models approach complexity. It takes their innate generative ability, the skill to create images, and transforms it into this concrete adaptive tool for refining understanding. It's a real shift from passive interpretation to active investigation.
So a final thought for you to chew on, considering that these emergent properties, things like deciding when to zoom in for better evidence or autonomously switching off the visual step to be more efficient, arose spontaneously just from learning this interleaved dialogue. What does this suggest about the minimum resources we actually need to achieve human-like adaptive problem solving in AI? Is the path to more sophisticated reasoning found more in this kind of clever process training than in just, scaling up the sheer size of the model?
That raises a really essential question, doesn't it, about the economics of AI research. If a 7 billion parameter model can spontaneously develop this kind of adaptive metacognition, deciding when to use text, when to use an image, and what kind of image manipulation it needs, we may be getting to a point where optimizing the reasoning algorithm is the real frontier, not just brute force scaling. It suggests the secret to intelligence might be in teaching a model how to think adaptively, rather than just feeding it an endless ocean of examples.